Hi all, welcome back to Centered by Courtney. This week I'm going to talk about kind of spring and Easter, and it's just crazy to me that spring is here. It is so much, I think, fun kind of going on in this season, whether you celebrate Easter or simply feel the shift in the air, the flowers blooming, the allergies coming out. There is a lot on this of rebirth, reawakening, and kind of like resting. And so I kind of want to dive into that a little bit with you guys this week. As we come into this new portion of the year. So let's talk a little bit about the spiritual meaning of rebirth and transformation. I think there's a big misconception that rebirth is always like this huge thing, right? Like obviously when we talk about like human birth or whatever, any kind of birth, it's normally like a large event. But when I think of like rebirth, I think of these small, soft changes that are happening in your life. You know, it's not like this crazy big reset. And I think sometimes we get a little caught up in like, we need to do a massive reset, kind of like when the new year comes around. And I think it's kind of these like soft, small changes that we're incorporating in our everyday life that are so important. And so, you know, in Easter, it's kind of that spiritual essence. It's about resurrection. It's not just in the religious, not just in like the religious sense, but also just in the spiritual sense of kind of like that rebirth and kind of pausing and coming back to life and figuring out as, you know, the plants come back to life and we're coming out of winter and it feels more livable. You know, what does that really look like for you? And so, you know, your old self isn't really wrong. It was just kind of another chapter. And so kind of going through that feeling of like rebirth and regrowing and evolving, it's a great time to kind of pause and figure out what are the things in your life that you do want to change and kind of what that looks like. So part 2 of this is kind of like what spring teaches us about renewal. When you think about the earth, it doesn't really rush to like bloom super quickly, or like the plants aren't just like, and we're here. It takes some time. And I think, you know, I am definitely someone who, as you can tell, I get excited, I talk fast. I need to also remember, and probably so do you, to kind of like pause and give yourself time for these changes and this rebirth and kind of coming into this. And, you know, it kind of shows that beauty comes after rest, which I think is like what winter is all about, is that rest, going inward, taking time to pause. And there's kind of that messy middle, right? Where it's like, you know, the shifting weather, the pollen coming up. It's just like kind of a mess. And I think that's really big part of the process that gets kind of left out over time. Everyone's like, oh, it's just, you plant the seed, you water the seed, and in a week you're healed. And you're like, that's not exactly how this all works all the time, right? And what feels dead might just be dormant. So you're like, oh, I had this dream and it's not happening. And even my girlfriend and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago. We were like, you know, were we too late to social media on this? And it's like, you know what? No, like it wasn't just, you know, 10 years ago, that's the only way you could make it kind of thing, and what that looks like. And so things may seem dormant, but they're not dead. And so I think that's kind of a big piece of this. And nature kind of often sheds the old effortlessly. I think it's a little bit harder for us humans sometimes to kind of like get rid of the things that we don't want to keep with us anymore and kind of come into this next phase. And so I think spring is such a beautiful time to do that. You know, and it's like, think about it, especially like in the fall season, we don't question why the trees drop their leaves or when flowers bloom again. So why do we doubt our own timing for growth? You know, as we kind of go through all of this, you know, it's hard to not be impatient and be wondering what's going on and where things are at and what is this going to happen for me, but really giving that patience and kind of giving that up to say like, okay, things will happen when they should. I'm taking the right steps in the right direction. And I think that's a little bit of manifesting as well. You know, it's like you think about what you want, you try to live that kind of life, and you know, you're waiting for that to kind of be called in, but you're also taking steps towards that action. And that feels a little bit like spring to me. And then I think the third part of this is shedding old energy and starting fresh. So, you know, obviously as spring comes around, it's a great time for like movement, going on walks, getting outside, doing all those kind of things. I laugh because here in, you know, Arizona, it always feels like the seasons are like so flipped for me, because as soon as spring starts coming into summer, I'm like, it's getting hot. I don't want to be outside. And most of the year, you know, the rest of the world and other places, it's a lot of times the summer is like the fun outdoor time, hanging out. And I'm like, yeah, that's like when I hibernate. So it's kind of funny, but for most people, like going outside, getting away from your phone, being more present in those things, maybe doing a cleansing ritual would be awesome. So like just taking like a really cleansing bath. It doesn't have to be anything too extravagant. I think sometimes we think like we need to do this 15-step process, and it's like, no, just be present, be in the moment, take a moment for yourself, you know, do a little ritual, and it doesn't have to be anything crazy. And then, you know, obviously, as I kind of joke about Easter here, you could kind of do like a fun little, with your altar, you could possibly put some cute little eggs, and kind of like that whole feeling of like rebirth and renewal and like reawakening has become kind of come into this. And I did actually do a very fun little Easter sound bath, not anything like religious, but just kind of like an Easter egg hunt kind of theme. And it's something I want to share with you guys. So that'll be coming out here this week as well, which I'm excited for you guys to check out. And yeah, I think, you know, as we leave winter, my last kind of piece here is like, I think it'd be really fun to write like a letting go letter, saying goodbye to an old version of yourself as you kind of come into and call into this new version, this little bit of rebirth, this little bit of change, thanking your old self for all the things that they were there to do for you, but allowing you kind of to move on to this next step. So I hope you check out the sound bath. I hope you have a beautiful week, and I will see you next week.